This is Pink Talks, the place where we discuss intersectionality and human rights.
Hello and welcome to Pink Talks, the show where we discuss human rights and all things intersectional. I'm Dinara, and hosting with me today is Katerina. Today on the show, we're excited to have Dankhaiaa Khovalyg, a decolonial feminist and anti-war activist, writer, and the author of the podcast, Republic Speaking, about the Asian republics of Russia. Dankhaiaa is ethnic Tuvan and was born and raised in the Republic of Tuva in southern Siberia. She's currently based in Berlin. Her articles and pieces have been published in various independent Russian media, and she's also an author of her own book. She's going to share her story and expertise on how art can help in the process of decolonization. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pink Talks.
Hi, Dankhaiaa. We were wondering if your name holds any special meanings, and if so, if you can share the significance or the story behind it.
Mm-hmm. Sure. First of all, hello, everyone. I'm super honored to be here. Thank you for inviting. Thank you for listening to me specifically. My name, Dankhaiaa, is Tuvan. My grandmother gave it to me. The story behind the name is a little bit tragic. The thing is, I hated this name for a very, very long time because, you know how it's written. It's quite difficult, right? Even in English, in Russian, it might not make sense because of the letters and stuff. So it was... And I guess it is difficult to grow up in Russia when you have a difficult non-Russian name because people tend to mispronounce you or try to make up with some simpler equivalent of your name because, I don't know, I guess they're just not accustomed to non-Russian names. So my parents gave me like a second name. It's Dana or Dana, how people say it in Europe. And it was such a simplified way of living, was just Dana, you know, because it was so simple just to say, hi, my name is Dana. And everyone was like, oh, cool name. And but I don't know. I think a few years ago, I started to reflect on this specific fact that my real name is Dankhaiaa. Why do I call myself Dana? And is it like real me, this Dana woman? How different she is from the woman called Dankhaiaa. And then I felt that it's so important to keep, carrying the name that was given to me by birth by my grandmother and was approved by my parents and all my family. The meaning of the name is like raising sunrise or something like that. It's very poetic in Tuvan. I like it, really like it. And it's just a little bit sorrowful and I guess hurtful to think that all these years, 20-something, I really hated that name because people tend to, mispronounce it dramatically, and it just grew up. And sometimes it was called in a way that I didn't even recognize the name itself because it was Danhalana, Dankhaiaa, whatever. Yeah, Dinara, you not so empathically. Do you feel that it's also your common pain as well?
Yes, I recognize so much this journey of reclaiming your own name or even your own cultural identity. So I'm so glad that you eventually had it back.
Oh yeah.
And now you have it with a pride with your own name.
I guess so. Now I have another problem. I have to reteach all my friends and relatives to call me, Dankhaiaa again, because they just used to me being Dana and, all that stuff. But it will go as it came.
That's such an inspiring topic. I will actually go back to this later on the discussion. But right now, I would like go back a little bit in a timeline and talk about this. I was wondering, like in May, you participated in this festival of Central and Eastern European film in Berlin, right? Okay, so like and you also talked there like about this concept of decolonization and in the context of Russian republics. Like how did it go? Like how was your message received?
Me and my colleagues Rinchina and Sesek, who make the project of illustrators native. It's a community of different illustrators from native indigenous people of Russia. So we were invited to that festival to speak on a special discussion panel to talk about decolonization, about our project, about the war as well. And we were very, very nervous because, we were the only participants with Russian citizenship. And though we are, of course, anti-war and we participated and still do in the protest, and we do our anti-war activism. Me, myself, I do a lot of that. But still, it's a delicate topic and delicate situation, but we decided to go because it was a way to speak to another audience, to try to share our message, to raise those problems, because our nations just do not exist in Europe like as a concept, or not only in Europe, in the US, everywhere else. Even in Russia, sometimes you feel like you do not exist because no one knows about Tuva, my republic, or they know only some stereotypes and stuff. So yeah, we decided to go. We were very nervous. The panel surprisingly went quite well. There were many people who came and asked many questions. They were very involved in the discussion. And there were few Ukrainians who were extremely supportive, and something you do not expect because you just cannot expect anything like that from people who suffer right now this full-scale invasion and the war, which lasts for more than 9 years right now. So yeah, it was super important to talk about this, about the fact that Russia is a multinational state. It's not a homogenic Slavic country, that there are more than 190 ethnic groups, and that we exist. We were colonized. We are here to talk about all these things, and we try to bring this decolonial topics with our art projects, like this podcast. It's not specifically anti-war. It's I call it soft decolonial power, because I just realized that I kind of had to start with the very, very, very base, just to remind people of who we are, because we do not really study our history properly. We know a lot about how Russian ethnic group was formed, but we know nothing about our ethnic groups, and that we had our own civilization back in the history. So yeah, it went very well. I met so many amazing people. I watched a Kyrgyz movie by Aktan. Let me quickly. Aktan Kubat. He's a Kyrgyz film director, and it was such a home-like feeling to meet so many people from Central Asia, because right now I, for example, cannot go to Russia because I will most likely be arrested. So it was, a little bit like home. So that was the festival, but most of the time I just slept because I was so exhausted. So I just decided to use that time to have some rest and sleep in the hotel.
So, linking to that topic of the majority of special Western countries don't know this fact that Russia has many ethnic groups. Perhaps can you tell us a little bit about the Tuvan culture and history so we can have a little bit more knowledge?
Sure. As I just said, in Russia, there are more than 190 ethnic groups that are designated as nationalities. And among 85 subjects, which are like administrative regions in Russia, there are 21 national republics, which are like native lands of the so-called ethnic minorities like Tuva, Buryatia, Kalmykia, Chechnya, Dagestan, and others, and also 5 autonomous okrugs. That's also another way of calling administrative region, with substantial or predominant ethnic minority as well. So Tuvans are the Turkic nation with a Turkic language. It's our land is located in the mountains. 80% of our republic is actually mountains, so it's a super mountainy region. We have a huge border with Mongolia. We were only joined to USSR in 1944, so we were the last ones who have been, joined to the Russian state, however you call it. So most of us speak Tuvan language, which is, when you think of it now, which is quite quite a treasure, because so many nations in Russia, they partly lost their national ethnic identity due to the process of Russification and colonization with all its consequences and attributes. So Tuvans are Buddhist, with some pagan like shaman culture also very, very popular in the region. It's a demographically quite young republic. I mean, people there usually have big families. For example, I have 2 siblings, and in Russia, usually families with 3 children are considered to be like big families and have some privileges and perks. But for regions like Tuva and a few more regions from North Caucasus, this term like big family only starts with having 4 children in the family, because we are historically and traditionally have more children in our families. Well, what can I say else about Tuvans? Tuvans have lived in that land many centuries, probably 1,000 years, because it's quite an ancient native people. And there are lots of us in Siberia with a bit similar history, but we were the last ones to have been, joined to the state. Others have been colonized quite much earlier. Like, for example, Buryats, it was 18th century. Saha people, you probably know about Yakutia. It's a huge region, the biggest one in Russia, and actually the wealthiest one in terms of its resources, diamonds and stuff. So they have been colonized in 17th century, and it's all quite bloody history that has been, quite silenced. You do not usually talk about it in schools and universities. You only taught the history of being voluntarily joined, like nations themselves expressed some voluntary will to join and stuff. Yeah. There are only 280,000 Tuvans in the world, and most of them, like 95%, live in Tuva, because we have a huge connection and attachment to the land, to the earth, where our ancestors are buried, where we will be buried, and all that stuff. We have been nomads in the past, so that's why probably that's where this attachment comes from. To the land, to the mountains, to the earth. Almost all Tuvans live in Tuva, and few of us, probably, I don't know, less than 100, live somewhere in the world.
Yeah, that's so interesting. But can we delve a little bit more on the concept of colonization? Can you talk a little bit about the process of colonization and how it connects to cultural identity?
Yeah. So how does colonization impact the forming of national identity, right?
Yeah.
It's quite a difficult question because the answer would be quite long. I'll try to maybe sum it up. Well, first of all, colonization is the fact that some metropole or so-called center is dominant to other regions that it has colonized in the past. So it means that, first of all, the culture, for example, colonizers' culture is dominant, like Russian culture, for example. Growing up as an Asian in Russia, for example, on my native land, I constantly felt excluded from mass media and culture, but accustomed at the same time to systemic racial and ethnic discrimination, because there is a hierarchy that puts the so-called titular nation to the very top and others to the very bottom. And this colonization, it works the way that colonizers bring some civilization, which is some more developed industrialization, probably because they have more resources, right? Because they're colonizers. Of course, they have more resources. So they bring again those civilization, medicine, education, whatever, and propose themselves or just express themselves as the ones who brought the values. I don't know, something good, something higher, some good to that nation that has been developing slower than the colonizers' society. But there is a very important fact that maybe many of our people still do not understand, that our civilizations weren't more basic or slower or whatever. They were just a little bit different, and it's specific, and it's totally okay, because especially when it comes to nomadic cultures, that nomadic cultures are less industrialized, of course, because of the way of economy and life and lifestyle and all that stuff. So if you compare lifestyle of nomadic people and those who settle in some specific land, for example, agriculturals or whatever, of course they will be different. And of course, from the lens of the Western theory, the nomadic cultures would be, more basic, because again, there is this lens of Western culture that everything should develop in some specific, very, very linear way. So yeah, that's, I guess, Russians being very close to Europe and this European culture, they also accepted us as being lower and less developed and all that stuff. So of course there were numerous episodes of resistance, and also group resistance, nation resistance. But it was difficult because, again, the colonizers, they have more resources because they are colonizers already. And when they came to us, for example, to Tuvans, they already had an enormous experience of having to deal with native people and the ways to colonize them, or just make them make them the servants or quasi-citizens of the Russian government. It's always about the trade. When they come with goods and try to trade it to some natural stuff, like, the fur, the meat, and all those things. And that's how they settle their influence. The trade influence, economic influence, is usually one of the strongest way to expand colonizers' influence on the land. And also it's the I would say it's other power because they have more weapons. They have already colonized some peoples that have huge experience in, for example, metal production, and that's why, especially back then in 19th century, in 18th century, it was super important because that was the only way to lead those battles, to do those battles. So it was quite aggressive. Communication. Like they took some people. They used to kidnap some people to make the villages and the societies listen to the colonizers' policy and all that stuff. And also it's Christianization, because all our regions have been either pagans or shamanistic or Buddhist. So they just bring this. They just brought this Christianization, and those people who have been Christian, they had more privileges. For example, the courts have used to perceive Christian people as more rightful, and sometimes, and when you live in such conditions, you at some point start to gain this perspective yourself, feeling that being Christian is a privilege. Being Christian is something that will give you a better life. And if you, for example, somehow find a common ground, a common language with the colonizers, you will also have a better life, and your children and your families. So people had to adopt and adjust as well, because again, it's all people always just wanted to do is to try to live the better life and to care for their families and stuff. I guess it's a super long and boring answer, but I guess
not boring at all, because I think that the majority of people, it's not well versed in the concept of decolonization. Even in Europe, we are now starting to talk about decolonization of thoughts, of spaces, and all of that stuff. So it was a super enlightening way for you to talk about this stuff, and that can be, of course, read throughout other cultures, of course, that suffered colonization. Yeah, but I think that Dinara had a question for you for about examples, right, Dinara?
I was just listening, and it was like all colonizers, they act the same way. Did they have like a guidebook? What? What did they know?
colonizers university,
Yeah, but and I also thought about like your grandmother giving you a very meaningful name in Tuvan language, but at the same time, in order to protect you, she gave you also a second name. Like, and now hearing you, like you're talking about like having like people having privileges if they would accept the conditions of the colonizers, it like makes total sense to me. Like why she did this, like it was so protective of her. And also you mentioned like Tuvan being a nomadic nation, and like I also come from a nomadic heritage, and I know that like in nomadic cultures, the language is very important, like because like the verbal oral literature, like it's like more developed and rich than like written literature. Is it the same like with Tuvan?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Oral folklore is something that has existed many centuries, though we, until the 20th century, never had our own specific alphabet and our own writing, our own writing. We used Mongolian script before, because Mongolia was another colonizers of ours, but only in the 30s of the last century, in Moscow, in the university, they created alphabets and Cyrillic based writing for all of the nations that have been colonized by Russia. So until that time, we didn't have our own specific writing, which wasn't really a problem because, as you just said, the oral folklore and just the oral language was so developed, and so many fairy tales, songs and legends and myths and everything that people just share with their children and tell stories about some of the past, some of the relatives to their children and grandchildren, was just passed through the history by these oral stories. So yeah, it's language is super important. I mean, the native language, because it's not only how you write and talk some stuff, it's mostly how you think, because the language in your head really forms how you perceive the world. And I feel it every time when I read something in Tuvan, because unfortunately, it happens that Russian is my main language, because again, I was sent to Russian school and Russian lyceum, Russian class, because my parents wanted me not to have any accent, because they knew I would go to the university in some big cities like Moscow or St. Petersburg. And my appearance is already non-Russian. So it's better be perfect Russian. That would be my, helping instrument or something like that. So right now I study written Tuvan, which is very difficult, because when someone, some outsiders create a language for the nation they didn't know at all, it's sometimes doesn't make sense. Some of the rules, some of the stuff, and it's quite a difficult written language, very difficult. When you say something just like in the usual oral way in Tuvan, and you try to write everything just as you said it right now, and compare with the the right written way of the same speech, it'll be so different. There'll be mistake or one or more in every word, and it's difficult. It's very difficult. And that's why the language is important. And that's why it's a huge shame that we do not have our languages as a necessary, or how do you say it, like a basic school educational program. We don't have it. So it's always the matter of the families if they want their children to study, to learn the native language or not. And when you make the language facultative, like non-necessary, of course you make it, you start to make it disappear, because with all this globalization and Russification, all the cartoons that children watch on the TV because their parents are working, or the internet, the YouTube and everything, all is either Russian or English, and the first content you usually contribute is Russian speaking or Russian written content. So Russian just becomes your main language, main tool to communicate with the world. And that's how you start to lose your language in every step of the way.
Yeah, your answer actually answered a question that I had. So about the how language fits in the process of decolonization. So I was about to ask you if the Tuvan culture has any kind of programs to try to revive the language. So, but you already answered that, because it's so important from my point of view. For me, that I'm in Portugal, and Portuguese being what Portuguese were in the past and what we did to African countries. So I do understand this question of language. But I think that Dinara has another question about more personal one.
May I quickly add to your question, because there was one important thing that I didn't say about the language.
Of
The thing is, in
course.
Tuva, And in our republics, of course, these decolonial narratives are very supported by people. And even though they sometimes maybe cannot consciously linked it and connected to decolonial phenomena, like in general, what they do and what they feel is 100% decolonial. And they try to produce content in Tuvan. They do lots of stuff in Tuvan because that's the language they live in and think and have dreams and all that stuff. But the problem is that it should go from the government as well, because when there is no governmental support of the language, eventually it weakens and starts to disappear. Yeah, that's all from my side.
For me, that's an incredible, in fact, like you said, the majority of Tuvan people, they speak Tuvan language, so they use Tuvan language. But at the same time, Tuvan school students, they don't enjoy Tuvan language classes or like classes in Tuvan languages on a mandatory basis. It's just like additional classes. Did I hear you correctly?
I mean, it depends on children, because for me, it definitely was some, burden that I was happy to be freed from. And some of my classmates in the school, I grew up in the capital. So the capital is usually always more Russified than the villages. So I think some of my classmates shared the same feeling that I had. Others, I think they also, first of all, I think children do not reflect it so deeply as we do right now, because, they have a little bit different world perception. But I think if I try to analyze it, some of them, they did perceive it as some burden because, again, it's additional classes. Your classmates go to, have a walk or play or whatever, and you go to the lessons of Tuvans or Tuvan literature or something. But for many of Tuvans, the language is essential because I guess it comes from the fact that Tuva has been joined only recently, like it's been just 80 years. It's nothing compared to the centuries of colonial experience for other nations like Buryatia, for example, or Sakha people, or people from the North Caucasus and other republics like Kalmykia and others. So we really preserved the language until 1944, I guess until 1920s. I don't know. I think there were just few people who could speak Russian because they actually worked with Russian traders and people who, brought some commodities and goods. So the rest of them just spoke Tuvan. My grandmother, for example, she doesn't speak Russian well. And she was so happy that I switched to Tuvan a year ago, because she finally started to, felt really, just speak freely with me in Tuvan, because I didn't spoke a word in Russian, and that was such a relief to her. And we have villages, really entire villages, that do not speak Russian. And that's why for Russians, Tuvans are, barbarians who do not even speak Russian freely or do not know Russian. And that's why there are so many stereotypes, so much stigmatization and dehumanization, because of the fact that we somehow managed, and probably it'll be better to say dared, to preserve our ethnic identity.
Yeah, I understand you. And what about your personal journey of decolonization? What was the crucial moment, and how did it change your perception of the world?
Mm-hmm. The last 8 years I spent in Moscow because I studied there, my bachelor degree, master's and stuff, worked there. It was not easy because there were so many cases of ethnic discrimination, even some physical abuse, because some people got really angry when you start to defend yourself in some conflict situations. Yeah, so I always felt that some of my part is torn away, and it's that Tuvan part. And if I disattach it, if I hide it somewhere, I can be almost Russian with my perfect Russian language, perfect writing skills, and all that stuff, with my Russified identity, I mean, compared to many of my friends and relatives in Tuva. So that was, I think, a compromise I lived with for many years. And then I just started to feel that I cannot live like that anymore, because every time I go back to Kizil, it's my hometown, the capital of Tuva Republic, I feel that it's such a huge difference between how people in Moscow live and how people in Tuva live. And what is the logic behind it? Does it mean that we worse or less worthy, or that we're stupid, or what? Why do we live like that? Tuva is just a little bit of statistics. Tuva is the poorest region of Russia, like the very, very, very last one. So, and Moscow, of course, the first one. So you can imagine this shock every time I go back there. I feel that something is not right in the way how things work, because people that live in Tuva, of course, I'm biased, because I mean, everyone is biased. So I feel that people in Tuva, they're so delicate and gentle, and they have so much kindness and so much sense for freedom, and some Buddhist attributes that really inspire me, like, for example, the value of life, the value of earth and all that stuff. But how come they live so poor? I mean, how come we live so poor? Why is that? What is the reason? And then I guess that's when my decolonial process started, because I think that's the crucial way when you start to ask questions and you realize that answers that are given to you are not really, let's say, comprehensive. They do not really answer they might formally answer the question, but you feel that there is something more in it, something behind it, and you start to dig in it. And 2 years ago, I happened to visit a lecture of one poetess. She is originally from Azerbaijan, and she was the one who first told me the word decolonial lens, decoloniality, decolonial theory, decolonization. And it felt like something switched in my mind, like, a tumbler, someone turned on the light, and it suddenly made so much sense that I guess we are the colony, because when you start to look at the things in a way that someone colonized us, and we are, and our relationships with the state, our nation and the state are strictly hierarchical, and then you realize, then the answers, got fuller and clearer, and I guess, that was the crucial point.
Yeah. And how do you integrate the process of decolonization with your own activist work?
First of all, I started to started to find some resources and inspiration for my writing, because first of all, I was and I still am a writer, though activism is right now is the main thing I do, unfortunately. So I just started to write about my life, just to use Tuvan names, because before that I never used it, because it just felt weird, when you put some Tuvan name in that Russian context or some other context, because Tuvan names weren't the names I saw in some Russian, written whatever, like books or magazines or articles or something. So I decided to do it specifically because I felt that it's somehow I feel that it's weird. And then I started to do it consciously. And then I started just to bring more context of Tuva in my pieces, the pieces I wrote. And it was so cool. I mean, I kind of reopened my writing, I don't know, capabilities and skills. And that's how I first started to do decolonial actively. Then I started to tell people that please call me Dankhaiaa because that's my real name. And then the full-scale invasion started, and I didn't know what I could do besides some donation or I don't know, reposting of stuff, going to protest and others. When I saw the statistics, I think it was April 2022, that soldiers from national republics of Russia die more often, and the possibility of death for them in the Russian army in Ukraine is much higher than for a soldier from Moscow, for example, or from St. Petersburg. And that statistic just blew me away because there are so, few of us. Just, what is it, like 280,000 people? It's almost nothing compared to, for example, Russian population. And we are the poorest ones. Of course, for many men of ours, the army is a social lift. I mean, it's always been a social lift, because that's what happens when some region is poor. Army becomes a social lift. And then I felt like I can do something more in terms of this decolonial activism, in the field of anti-war activism, and I started to volunteer my help to anti-war ethnic movements and initiatives that whose main activity at that time was to help people from our republics terminate the military agreement with the Russian army and get back home from Ukraine and never go back, again there. So it was very difficult because it's so much fear and hate as well. And I don't know, just lots of stressful things. And then the mobilization happened, and the main work was to evacuate people from our regions to some safer spaces, some places like Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan or some other countries that are nearby, Mongolia and stuff. And it's always was so stressful. So much energy was drained away, and it felt like there is nothing inside of me anymore. Only this activism, only the attempts to somehow steal Tuvan lives from the DAS and from the Russian colonial machine. And then I decided that maybe I could do some parallel things, like soft decolonial things, because for many people in our republics, this direct anti-war statement might be, and it's awful to hear, but it might be too radical, because propaganda in our regions works much, much more aggressively and much more repressively than in other regions, because, our regions have some potential to at some point starting to want some independence or something, because we are different nations with different language, different culture, different history. I mean, everything is different. And that's why propaganda is super efficient as well in our regions, because they spend lots of resources to keep people only care about how to earn more money, just to care for their families, to pay for commodities and stuff. Yeah, so I started this podcast, and surprisingly, I don't think I really expected it. The feedback for such product was huge. Like, there was no podcast like that, I think, and that's why people finally, when finally getting it, started to express lots of positive feedback, and that was so cool. So I guess this is the other way of my decolonial and also anti-war as well
activism. Yeah, your answer was super helpful, because one of the questions that we had for you was, how do you integrate this process of decolonization in your writing? And that was just like, it was the inverse. So it was so funny for us to listen to your answer, right? Dinara, I think
Yeah,
that you.
I have a question. Yes, like, do you have any inspiring role models, like, or influencers, like you look up to?
I do. Most of them are from Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, because those countries, they are so far away in this decolonial journey than we are, because they got the independence 30 years ago. And of course, it really affected how people live, how people, I mean, of course, there are lots of terrible things happening in their countries as well. Like just recently, those case was the court and a woman getting imprisoned for like capturing the airport, all this terrible, absolutely dictatorship stuff. But for us, when we look at Kazakhstan and Kazakhstani and Kyrgyzstani societies, we can see how the civic society is evolving massively. How the initiatives they create to popularize their native language in their countries. I don't know. For us, there are so many things we could learn from their experience, and so many things we could get inspired of. Of course, it's not only Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. It's all other countries of Central Asia, and also some other countries that had this post-Soviet experience. But mostly, I guess it's Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, just because the world is tight and actually super small. So we have so many friends and acquaintances in these countries. And again, this activist bubble, it's so tight. So you get to know more people, know more activists from those countries. And the more you know, the more you get inspired. And I guess I have many role models. For example, Elmira Kakabayeva, she's a Kazakh writer. And you're nodding. Do you know her, Dinara?
Yes, and have you participated in your writing course, right?
I have. Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, like, can you tell me about this journey and what it meant for you, like, also, like, in the short maybe?
In Elmira's writing course?
Yeah, like, for those who doesn't know, like, right, like one of the persons she mentions, Elmira, so she created this course on how to decolonize your writing. And like this way, like I learned about you as well, Dankhaiaa. Like, this is a very incredible space to learn about the experiences of like ordinary people. So the way the course is constructed, it's she helps us to research our own family's history, but not through the like father paternal line, but from the maternal line. Because in those societies, like usually very patriarchal, we know a lot about like our grandfathers, fathers, and etc., but not so much from our mothers and grandmothers and great mothers. So this is one of the way of how to decolonize your own writing.
Yes, this course is actually called Family Ethnography. Yeah, how to decolonize your writing. And it's an amazing course because the methods and approaches Elmira uses to help people explore their family ethnography is truly decolonial, and which is extremely important, super feminist, because again, we really lack feminist perspective in everything we have and do. So I met lots of incredible women from different countries of Central Asia, because I specifically went to her course for Central Asia, and I was the only Russian citizen like participant in the course. But it was super important for me to at least, in terms of the writing, be not involved with the Russian context, because there is sometimes too much of it in my life. So yeah, and we had amazing webinars and lectures with people who work with the language and family ethnography. We talked a lot about what is it, how can we even talk with our relatives about the family history, and do not, for example, question what they say, because we are used to questioning things, right? To fact check things. What probably my grandmother, exaggerates something, so I better fact check it on internet, whether what was exactly true and what she said. And Admira's approach was to try to not question, because it's also true, because it was, for example, if I use the same example as the grandmother, that was her experience, living experience, and why do I question her experience? Why do I rely on the sources I read on internet? Why I think that there is more, I don't know, authority in those resources, and not on my grandmother. So yeah, it's really inspiring and extremely, how to say, something that we really need, and something that we need more in different other forms and ways in our societies.
So let's dive a little bit on your podcast. So your name's podcast is Republic Speaking, and there you give space to Asian minorities to speak. So you are already versed in the theme of ethnic minorities and the process of decolonization. We assume. We were wondering, from all of your conversations, what new knowledge did you gain?
First of all, I think the biggest insight, and one of the most important insights for me, was that there is so much culture in our societies that many of us cannot even imagine, because we used to look at other parts of content, Russian speaking, English speaking, and all that stuff. And some of us just leave our republics because we, I guess, as I did in my past, do not see a better future while living inside of it. So we try to find something more meaningful in other places. And then I realized while making this podcast that there are so many people in our republics, currently within those regions, that do so much to preserve the culture, to preserve the language, to speak about colonization, probably in some different terms, because it's a bit dangerous to say such things directly. So they also adjust and adopt, but they do not lose this sense of their identity. And I just realized that it's also a colonial way of it's also a colonial perception of mine when I started to do that podcast, that I will reveal, that we have culture and all that stuff. I revealed nothing. I just spoke to people, and people shared that there is so much already existing, and there is so much we can already preserve, and this just gives more inspiration to create something new. So that was, I guess, I think super important insight for me, that we are so developed, so talented, so already complex and sophisticated.
Your podcast shed light on the experiences and struggles of Asian ethnic minorities of Russia. What common threads or shared experiences do you find among these communities?
I guess the most obvious one is the experience of discrimination, systemic racial and ethnic discrimination that people face when they leave their republics, or not even necessarily leave, but usually, when they go to universities in some bigger regions, like wealthier regions, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Yekaterinburg, some many other large Russian cities. And what they face there, it's societal trauma, a huge collective trauma that just passes through generations. For example, in the end of 90s and before, I think, 2012, there was a huge movement, not nationalist movement in Russia, with skinhead groups. Skinheads are actually Russian Nazis who killed non-Russian looking people, migrants, and we are perceived as migrants, not citizens, of course, because they do not really distinguish, between, let's say, Kyrgyz woman and Tuvan woman, or Kazakh man and Kalmyk man. So it was very, very dark and super scareful time. I, at that time, lived in my republic because I was smaller. I only was born in 1995. But I remember those times with my skin because people, my relatives, my family, teachers, just people around me constantly talked about it, maybe in whisper, maybe in some smaller notifications or some smaller things, but you always knew that people like us got bitten and got killed in the huge cities just because we look differently. And when I moved to Moscow, for example, I always had this inner fear that I couldn't even explain rationally. Why am I afraid that someone could stab me with a knife? And when I told that to my friends, they were so surprised, like, wow, this is so unusual fear. Like, did you have an experience like that? No, of course I didn't. But then after years and years, I realized that it's just this collective trauma of feeling unsafe in Russia when you leave your homes and place when you grew up. So I guess the thing that really, that we share, all of us, is this collective trauma of racism and chauvinism in Russia, unfortunately. But there are many of other things, but this is something that, is the most obvious.
Yeah, and my next line was is about the thing I love in your podcast, which may sound a little bit odd right now after your words, but I would do it anyway because, as you said, there are also different things, right, at the same time. And I have to confess, I really love the music in your podcast. And I know that the music in each episode was composed by the people from the same, from the region you focus on. How do listeners respond to the inclusion of regional compositions, and what was the feedback?
It actually wasn't entirely like you described. The thing is, first of all, I used a composition made by one-to-one musician, but then it was difficult to organize everything legally because she gave me her permission officially and all that stuff. Then it just was difficult. And then I started to try to find another musician from our regions. And I found, so basically, I guess it's safe to say that there is only one official jingle to the podcast, and it's an Altai musician. Musician from Altai. People, I think, I don't know. I don't think I ever received some distinct feedback about the music, like the music is blah, 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 or something like that. Mostly people really admire the, discussions, talks, lectures about the colonial history and all these things. They love the music as well, of course, because the music is amazing. It's an Altai songs, how do you say it? People songs or national songs? like ancient songs. So yeah, I mean, I like it a lot. I'm really glad that you mentioned it and that you also enjoyed it. But unfortunately, it would be so extremely difficult to find every time a musician from a specific region for a specific republic. I mean, for a specific episode. So I didn't do it, though it would be absolutely amazing in the future.
Yeah, I think that Dinara had a question about an open letter that you did. Dinara, do you want to?
Yes, like in March, right? Like on the 29th of March, you, among other indigenous activists, wrote and signed an open letter titled Nothing About Us Without Us, an open letter from Russia's indigenous and decolonial activists. What was the feedback or response to this letter?
It was... I mean, the feedback was not as massive as we could expect, because many Russian media, including, I mean, first of all, media from the opposition side, like liberal media, they totally ignored the fact that we made such a statement, though it was very important because it showed the solidarity among us and that we are somehow united and we stand for something like humanistic values and non-discrimination, non-exotization, and all that stuff. We received a lot of feedback from people from our republics because they could really relate to what was written in that statement, in that letter. A lot of activists, mostly from feminist organization, LGBTQ plus organization, and ecological, also joined. I mean, they signed the letter as allies, as those who are also can somehow feel solidarity with our letter. But yeah, mostly I guess it was ignored by the Russian opposition and the Russian liberal media. And that was surprising because, I don't know, there was nothing to ignore. I don't know, it was weird, and it was disappointing. But at the end, which is not the end, of course, but still, there was, maybe you heard about the Vancouver Declaration made by the OSCE. They finally admitted that Russia has had colonial history and that so-called ethnic minorities, like native indigenous people in Russia, are oppressed, are repressed, and there is a constant systemic ethnic and racial discrimination that we face in Russia. And our letter was also contributed to the fact that it was actually admitted on the international level. So in a way, it was super effective, because also for us, because different initiatives, different activists, individual or those who represented some movements and groups, we just realized that we are all together and there are lots of us, maybe not as many as we wanted, but still, and we are all together in one boat, heading to one destination, or many different, but in one field.
Yeah, thank you for your response.
So, and what advice would you give a young activist who is interested in getting involved in decolonization and anti-war efforts?
I think it might be two different pieces of advice, because anti-war and decolonial might be quite different. But I'll start with decolonial because it's like wider. I mean, the war at some point will end. I hope sooner than later. But the decolonial movement, I think, will never end, because there's so much struggle and resistance from so many forces and sides. So I guess my piece of advice for those activists who might be interested in this topic is to start asking questions and start to question things and start to look at things not only from your perspective, but from the perspective of those people you have never thought about before. Because that's where I think empathy starts, when you realize that you may have more privileges than others. What are those privileges? Where do they come from? Do other people have the same privileges? Why not? What does this result to? How can you change it? Have you ever feel that you might have discriminated someone in the past? It's okay. I mean, we're all in a way, products of this colonial imperial system. So we all carry it inside of us. But the thing is to start to question this and to try to change it. I think maybe one can just start Googling stuff. What is decolonization? Are there modern colonies right now? Was USSR a colonial empire? For example, read the letter "Nothing About Us Without Us" that we wrote. It's accessible in different languages: Russian, English, German, and French, I think, right now. So yeah, maybe follow those people, follow pages like indigenous people around the world or something like that. I think there's an Instagram page with the biggest number of followers. Feminist organization, because they also write about such topics. Yeah, and as for the anti-war movement, just start to require your governments to arm Ukraine, because this is the only way to sooner terminate the war. Sorry for being that radical, but it's true. I mean, anti-war activism never really ends with never really end the wars. What really ends the war is equipment and the governmental help of other countries. But what anti-war activism could do is to make the government, I mean, the aggressor's government weaker, and make other anti-war activists feel safer and stronger, and make other people, this so-called movable middle, for example, your relatives and friends who are not that sure that everything is so clear, they have some movable position, start to talk to them, to try to make them realize what's happening, show the independent media and all that stuff. So I guess that's where the anti-war activism really starts. But if you do all this stuff and you can do more, just go to protest with a huge banner, "Arm Ukraine." That'll be a lot in terms of the war we are in context of, because of course there are lots of other wars, lots of other war conflicts. But sorry, I talk about it because it's just my reality right now. I mean, direct reality.
Dankhaiaa, I have a question. What kind of future do you envision for Tuvan people and for other marginalized communities in the future?
My vision is extremely positive, because I need that picture of some future, a dream we head towards. This picture includes Tuvan people having Tuvan as a only, or at least one of the main necessary federal languages in their state, I mean in their region, for their government. More young people who do not afraid talking about politics and doing politics. More feminist organizations, more talks about sexual education, more connection, international connections to the countries that are really closer to us in a sense, like Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, other republics, to always share the experiences and knowledge, for example, on recultivation, ecology, how to make sure that all that industrial productions on our lands, that they do not destroy completely our ecology, how to make sure that there are no people in our republic that use outside toilets because they do not have some basic commodities like gas or water or electricity or something like that. I really believe that Tuva might become such a place in future. I cannot say what future would it be. I'm almost sure that this is the future I will never see, because it's a very, very long marathon. But I think it's all possible. I mean, I really think so. And this might be applied to any other region as well. Ecology, politics, education, basic provision of the main necessary commodities, and international relationships with those cultures that might really share the relevant experience, again, in the agriculture, ecology, politics, and other stuff. The revision of the history, of course, the preservation of the collective memory, like how was it to live in an independent Tuva? Because there was 22 years when Tuva was an independent state. It was a Tuvan People Republic, and no one almost remember it because no one really wrote it down. It's an inconvenient page of our history for Russian government, and history only lasts 3 generations. So those generations that might remember what their grandparents told them about their time, they might quite soon be dead, because again, 80 years, it's a lot. So we should preserve it and save all these memories, these archives and documentation. Yeah, I don't know if I fully answered your question. I think it's just the pictures in my head that create some puzzle that I still try to, gather.
Yes, you do. Thank you.
Do you want to address any other subjects that we didn't talk about in this episode, or do you want to leave a message?
I guess, the message is that our peoples, they are dragged into the war the Russian government has unleashed in Ukraine. And for many of our people, I mean, those who become eventually soldiers, it's not a matter of choice, or it's not a matter of some voluntarily conscious choice, but it's just, I don't want to just justify them. I just want to say that a lot of us, those outside the country and those inside, are trying to really resist this discrimination policy that is even, produced in the way of how people are drafted in the army. They mostly draft people from national republics because they are poorer, they have less access to, for example, lawyers or advocates or some legal help. So it's just easier for them to draft people from our republics. And then at some point they start to make us the face of the war, this cruel Buryat or cruel Chechen or whoever from those non-Russian republics. But we truly resist. A lot of our people do lots of anti-war activism, and it's the one that is made inside the country is especially valuable because the possibility of repression has never been higher, I think, in the history for us being in Russia. So we exist, we hear, we resist, and we also try to contribute to the Ukraine's soonest victory in this war, and we try to save our people. And if you think that Burats or Chechens or whoever are more cruel than Russian soldiers, they might be a little bit racist, because they are not. There is no much difference.
Yeah, that's a very insightful message. And so that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks to Dankhaiaa for joining us during this very insightful and meaningful discussion of the processes of decolonization and anti-war movements and how art can serve a powerful tool. So we hope that today's episode was interesting to you, and we would love to get your comments on today's episode. As always, thanks for listening to Pink Talks. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Pink Talks. Before we go, show some love for our favorite podcast by leaving us a comment and subscribe to the channel. We are Young Educators, a non-profit organization working on human rights, gender equality, and active citizenship. And this podcast was created with the support of our team. Ana Catarina Caldeira,
Laura Stafia.